to start our overview of what is the DBQ. Well, a DBQ is a document-based question. This is a type of free response question. And y'all, free response question just means not multiple choice. So anything that is not multiple choice on the test is a free response question. That includes short answer questions, LEQs, and DBQs. So FRQ, hold on, my pen's not working. That's a free response question. We've already covered short answer questions and long essay questions. Okay, with a short answer question, you don't need to write a thesis or context or body paragraphs. It's just 3 to 4 sentences for each part using ACE. And you will have 3 of those on the AP exam. For the LEQ, you're only going to have 1 of those, but you get to pick from 3 options. They're going to give you 3 questions and you get to pick whichever one is your favorite, okay? Whichever one you know the most about. But you don't have any documents or resources for the LEQ. They just give you the question, what are the causes and the effects of the Columbian exchange? And then you answer it with whatever is in your brain, okay? So no documents to cite or to source. The DBQ, in contrast, does give you documents. It gives you 7 documents to use. Now, does that mean you have to use all 7? No. To maximize your points, you should use 6 of the 7 documents. So if you get a document on there that's like a map and you have no idea what it's trying to tell you, you're just like, what does this map mean? I don't know. Well, then you don't have to use it, okay? So you can use 6 out of those 7 documents. Now, with this DBQ, however, you don't get a choice in a question. So whereas with the SAQ, you have to do number 1, you have to do number 2, but then you get to pick 3 or number 4. Okay, so you would just circle like, I don't want this one, I want this. And with the LEQ, you have option 1, 2, and 3, and you're like, okay, I'll pick option number 2. With DBQ, there's only 1 question because y'all, making a DBQ is like super hard and super time consuming. Okay, so they're just gonna give you 1 question and 7 documents. You don't get to choose between old imperialism versus industrial revolution. It's one and done. But one of the benefits about a document-based question is that you're able to use the documents to get some points, even if you have no idea what the essay is asking you. Okay, so like my kids got a DBQ one year on railroads, and we're just like, how are we going to write an entire essay on railroads? Well, they remembered the Industrial Revolution and they remembered a little bit about World War I, right? And so they were able to use the documents to back up some of their points so that they wouldn't get a complete 0 on the DBQ. And it's critically important that you do your best on the DBQ because look at how much it is worth. It is worth 25% of your score. Okay, I mean, multiple choice is worth 40. So if you're good at multiple choice and you're like, yes, coming in clutch. Okay, but the document-based question is worth a full 25% of your score. And this is the last part of the exam you're going to do. When you first start the exam, they're going to say, okay, part 1, multiple choice. Then part 2, short answer question. Okay, so you've already written 3 short answer questions with 3 parts each. Your hand is already cramping up by the time you get to the long essay question, where you have to write for about 35 minutes. And then you have to go on to an hour-long essay. So since the DBQ is the last part of the test, this is typically the part where students tend to fare the worst, right? You have a lot of energy, right, when you start the multiple choice section. And then if you don't know the answer, you're just like, okay, I haven't put C down for a long time, so let me put down C. You can guess and potentially get the answer right. With essays, though, it's recall based, not recognition based. And so you're not going to be able to just guess or put in fluff in order to maximize those points. And then by the time you get to the DBQ, you've already been writing for like 2 hours. So your hand is tired. Now with the DBQ this year, if you take it online, I think you're going to be able to type it. So if you're better at typing than at handwriting, then you may be able to go faster or it won't be as strenuous. But they also have in-person options. So as soon as I get more information about that, I'll let y'all know so you can start preparing, like, do I need to do hand exercises for writing these essays? And you'll notice that the LEQ is only 40 minutes long Okay, so about 5 minutes for brainstorming and then 35 minutes for actually writing the essay. Whereas the document-based question is an hour long, but you're not going to be writing for that entire 60-minute period. 15 minutes of those 60 are to be spent reading, because in addition to reading the question, the prompt, you also have to look at 7 documents. And most of those documents, about 6 out of the 7, are going to be excerpts. So excerpts from a book or a letter or primary source, secondary source, right? And then one of those documents is going to be an image stimulus. So that means it could be a map. It could be a picture of a sculpture like y'all saw in your last test. It could be a painting from the Renaissance, okay? Lots of different things that that last stimulus could be. And that's the document that people have the most difficulty with interpreting. So if you're not sure about what the map or the graph or the painting is trying to say, then you can skip it and move to the other 6 documents. But as you're going through that 15-minute reading period, take notes, okay? Start writing on the documents, because remember, that is your copy of the documents. That it's not a class copy where they're like, oh, don't write on it because the next class has to use it. That is yours. You're the only one who's going to get that test paper. You know, in a normal year, everyone who takes the test gets the same DBQ, because remember, they're taking it all at the same time and it's all in person and they can monitor for academic honesty, right? Last year, because it was online and they didn't want people like collaborating in, you know, Google Documents or Zooming each other during the test, they had some stringent monitoring technology that they used to make sure that people weren't cheating, but they also made a ton of DBQs. So if Nikhil was taking the DBQ last year as the same time as Alex, right? Nikhil might have one on the Industrial Revolution and Alex has one on the fall of the Aztec Empire, right? To make sure that even if y'all did communicate with other students in your class, you would have different documents and different questions. I don't know if they're going to do that for this year, okay? But it doesn't matter because you're not going to be communicating with other people while you're taking your test. Is the DBQ prompt from just a random theme or do they come from a specific period? That's a good question. So if you look here, it says the topic of the DBQ will be between years 1450 and 2001. Now, I hope they don't give you a DBQ on like the Green Revolution in the 90s, because we really don't get to period 4. If you remember what our periods are, period 1 is 1200 to 1450. So is your DBQ going to be on period 1? No. Okay, your LEQ could be, your SAQ could be, your multiple choice could come from period 1, but not the DBQ. Period 2, which is what we started in January that we're still in right now, is from 1450 to 1750. Okay, now old imperialism is not the only thing that happened in period 2. You also have the Protestant Reformation. You have 100 years of religious warfare in Europe. You have the rise of the Ottoman and the Mughal and the Safavid empires. You have the rise of the Russian Empire. Okay, so when I say, oh, your DBQ is on period 2, okay, y'all already know that the topic is going to be only what we've covered in period 2 so far. I'm not going to throw in a DBQ on Protestant Reformation and be like, good luck, what's transubstantiation versus consubstantiation? So in addition to giving you the time period, I've already given you the specific topic that we're covering, okay? But they're not going to do that with the DBQ. So period 1 is out, period 2 is in, period 3 is 1750 to 1900, and that's fair game. Okay, lots of stuff going on in period 3, but we're not going to get to period 3 this year. Okay, this year we're going to cover period 1 and period 2 of the curriculum, but just due with how this year has been, y'all are going to have to self-study period 3 and period 4. And period 4 is from 1900 to the present day. Now, they would be real jerks to give you a DBQ or an essay prompt on period 4. Like, that would just be cruel and unusual. That would be against the Geneva Convention at this point, right? Okay, but period 2 and period 3, I think that those are your strongest periods where they're going to pull those essays and those topics from. Okay, because approximately 60% of the test is on period 2 and period 3. So if you're self-studying and you're running out of time and you're like, how do I make my study schedule? Focus predominantly on period 3. We're going to cover period 2. I'm going to cover period 2 with you. Okay, we're going to get through that by May. Okay, but period 3 and 4, that's on you. I would focus on this one. Good so far? Okay. In addition, they don't tell you what historical thinking skill you're going to be asked. So you could have a DBQ on causation. You can have one on comparison. You can have one on continuity and change over time. Okay. And I'm not going to tell you which question you have for your exam on the 18th either. So be prepared. It could be cause and effect. It could be continuity and change. It could be comparison. Y'all, we've hit on all 3 of those historical thinking skills throughout our lectures. Y'all know causes and effects of old imperialism. In fact, we have mnemonic devices like the 3 Gs to remember the causes. What are the 3 Gs? Motivations for exploration. Glory's one, good. Gold. And God. Good, I saw someone in the chat. Glory, gold, and God. So right there, you already have a body paragraph, right? Those are 3 causes you could discuss. Okay, and then you could talk about social effects, demographic effects, religious effects, political effects, economic effects, okay, with continuity and change. Which one do you think is easier to argue? That thing has stayed the same or that thing changed? Oh yeah, definitely that things change. Social changes, demographic changes, cultural changes, political changes, economic changes. And then with comparison, well, you have 2 different worlds. You have a new world and an old world, the Americas, and then Europe, Africa, and Asia. So you could compare how they fared in the Columbian Exchange, who benefited and who suffered and how. Okay, so you can cover all 3 of those historical thinking skills for this essay. Are we good so far? In fact, one year, my students got an LEQ on the Columbian Exchange, and they were just like, oh my gosh, thank you, because it was so easy to write about, because we had gone over it in so much depth. All right, now on this slide, everything that you see here we've covered before with SAQs and LEQs, except for these 3 bullet points. These are the new things. Number 1, the DBQ is in 60 minutes. You need to watch your time because 15 of those minutes are for proofreading. So I would recommend that once you read the prompt, once you read the question, circle and underline the parts of the question that tell you what you need to be answering. If it says, analyze the trade revolution brought on by Portugal's discovery of a route around Africa, then revolution means it's talking about changes. So you know that your historical thinking skill is continuity and change over time. If it says discuss the impact the Columbian Exchange had on the New World, well, impact is an effect. So you'd know that you're doing cause and effect. Okay, so just go ahead and determine which historical thinking skill you're focusing on. And then you could do a rough draft or an outline. If you already know information, just go ahead and jot it down to the side so you can later organize it into your essay. Good so far? All right. You do need a thesis because this is an essay, not an SAQ. And some of the points that we cover for the DBQ are going to look really familiar to y'all, especially going back to the LEQ. So like the LEQ, you're going to have context. You're going to have a thesis. You're going to have an SF5 point. And you're going to have the complexity point. Okay, so some of these points you're already well familiar with. So this should be a repeat of that. Again, you're going to be given a test booklet. You're going to be given that as scratch paper. You're also going to be given paper to write your essay on. You don't need to bring any paper with you. The only thing you need to bring is a pen. It has to be in blue or black ink unless you're typing it, which as I get more information, I'll let y'all know about that. Outside SFI, meaning not in the documents. If you have a document talking about smallpox, you can't talk about smallpox as outside SFI. You can talk about smallpox, yes, but you need to cite the document that was talking about smallpox. So you'd have to find something that's not mentioned anywhere in the documents to drop into your essay, and not just like a random fact like, oh, the turkey was almost our national bird because Ben Franklin thought it was cool. Okay, it has to be something that relates back to the question. Okay, so if you're talking about smallpox and you want to talk about how that led to the encomienda, or so sorry, how that undermined the encomienda and led to the asiento, that would be relevant outside SFI that's not mentioned in the documents. And then of course, in your body paragraphs, you're going to have to back up your thesis. If your claim in your thesis was that the Columbian Exchange had mostly negative effects on the New World, then you're going to need to give some evidence for that. Okay, so things were bad for the New World. What are some examples that you could list? Negative impact on the New World. Disease, good, Jadesha. So you could cite disease, but again, it has to be specific factual information. So what's the biggest disease? Yeah, I saw you mouth it. Smallpox. Smallpox wiped out approximately 90% of the Native American population. That's definitely a detriment to the New World. Then you have to explain the historical significance. Why was it so significant that this disease wiped out so many Native Americans? Okay, they weren't immune to it, and so they died off in higher amounts, but who was immune to it? The Africans. And good, I see in the chat, Nikhil said that it caused the asiento system by the Portuguese. So the Native Americans were dying off in higher numbers due to a lack of immunity to smallpox. And so we see the beginnings of a forced labor system where people from Africa were kidnapped and forcibly moved over into the New World to work on plantations growing cash crops for the Europeans. So that is a huge impact, okay, that you're adding cause and effect into that. Smallpox led to the development of the New World slavery system. Okay, that can all be in your body paragraph, and you can add in outside SFI. So it's more than just saying things were bad or things were good because disease. You have to go into detail. Okay, and then you have to do it in complete sentences as well. One of our teachers in the history department did a professional development over the weekend for the AP training, and they covered short answer questions. And she shared some of the resources that she got from that. And I've posted those in extra resources. I've posted some extra info on SAQs, for instance, if you go into that folder labeled extra resources. And it specifically says that if you don't write in complete sentences, you can't get credit. Okay, so grammar is incredibly important for this test, because if you're writing an SAQ and you're just writing in dependent clauses or incomplete sentences, or you're missing a verb, even if your SFI is correct, they're not going to give you the points. Okay, so make sure that you're practicing your grammar like with our bell ringers every day. All right, so pre-writing, before you even start writing the essay, you have 15 minutes to brainstorm. Okay, so in that 15 minutes, here are the steps that you should follow. Number one, identify the topic. Well, y'all, for my class, for the 18th, you already know the topic. What is the topic of your DBQ in February? Good, old imperialism. What you don't know is the historical thinking skill. It could be cause and effect, it could be continuity and change, it could be comparison. But let's go with cause and effect, because that's, pretty much a shoo-in, right? So let's say that your prompt is Describe and analyze the impact of the Columbian Exchange on the New World. Impact of Columbian Exchange on the New World. Okay, now that is specific, y'all. It's saying you're going to need to do causation in the New World. So should you be talking about Africa or Europe or Asia in your essay? No, you may mention them, okay, but your whole essay can't be on Europe because Europe is old world. That's Eastern Hemisphere. You need to focus on the Americas, North, Meso, and South America for this essay, okay? Now, you already know some information before you even read the documents. So you may want to jot down, okay, I know that I'm doing cause and effect. Let's make a column over here for causes and a column over here for effects. Now we've already said, hey, some of the causes include the 3 G's. How would we categorize that? If we were going to categorize God for the 3 G's, then we would put religious causes. Okay, what about for gold? What kind of cause would that be? I'm sorry? Wealth, okay, so economic. Because remember, it's not just gold that they're after. They're also after silver and cash crops. What about glory? Status or power, political power. Okay, so we have religious causes, economic causes, and political causes. Okay, you basically could write 3 different paragraphs on just that. But remember, it's not asking just about causes, it's asking about the impact, the effect. You have to answer both halves of the historical thinking skill. Okay, so we have religious causes, economic causes, and political causes. What kind of categories could we put for effects?
Religious effect.
I'm sorry, baby, repeat that.
Religious effect.
Good, religious effect. What happened to the Native American religions? They were wiped out, replaced by what religion? Catholicism. Demographic effects, good, Nikhil. That is a big one, okay? Because demographic just means population. So you could talk about smallpox. You could talk about the encomienda. You could talk about the addition of new peoples to the New World, the arrival of Europeans, but also the arrival of Africans. You could talk about the social effects with that. If you want to talk about the casta system, okay? You could talk about economic. You could talk about political. Now, this is just brainstorming. Am I going to be able to write an essay in 45 minutes that covers every single one of these categories? Nope, not going to happen. I'm not that good, okay? Not unless I can stop time, right? But this question isn't asking you to do all of that. What you need to do is, when you're brainstorming, pick your strongest ones. If you're looking at causes and you're like, okay, I need to write about effects, so I don't want to spend 40 minutes writing about all the causes of the Columbian Exchange, let's see which one I could argue best. Which of these 3 do you think is one of the most important causes of the Columbian Exchange? The driving force. The economy, exactly. They were after wealth, mercantilism, gold, silver, cash crops, the encomienda, the asiento. Y'all have so much you could write about economic, right? So let's say you pick economic causes were the most important, done. Let's move over to effects. If you had to pick 2 of these categories to make 2 body paragraphs, which ones do you think would be the strongest argument that you could have the most SFI? I would choose demographic, yeah. The effects on the population, yeah, we could go on and on about that. That would be a very strong paragraph. But let's say you have to pick one more. Which one would be your next choice? And there's no wrong answer, y'all. It's your essay.
I would choose social.
Social. Okay, excellent. And y'all, that doesn't mean you have to do economic causes, demographic effects, social effects. You could do religious causes, religious effects, political effects. You could do 2 causes and 1 paragraph on effects. Okay, it is open-ended. As long as you back up your claim, your thesis, then you're going to qualify for points. Okay, so even before looking at any documents, we already know stuff about the topic, so we've started brainstorming and outlining. Now determine the time frame. We already know the time frame because it's period 2, 1450 to 1750. So do we need to be talking about the 20th century in our essay? Probably not. Do we need to be talking about the fall of Rome in 476? Probably not. Not relevant. You should stick within this time frame that's given to you. Okay. While you're reading the documents, jot down ideas that you could use for your categories. Like if you're reading document A and you're like, oh, this is talking about smallpox, that would be really good for my paragraph on demographic effects. Then you may want to write A over to the side. If you get to document D and it's talking about the encomienda system and the asiento, that might be good for social. Okay, so you go through the documents and you start chunking them or bucketing them into different categories to use as evidence in your essay. Now, when you start writing your essay, it's going to be the same format as the LEQ. You're going to have an intro paragraph, body paragraphs, and a conclusion. Now, if you don't have time to write the conclusion, that's fine, because the conclusion and the intro, both are worth the same points. And if you get them in one, then you get them in the other. The 2 points that you get for the intro are context, which remember is background information, and the thesis, your claim that's going to have these categories of causes and effects. For context, this says specifically pre-contextualization, because you could do context that's before the time period, during the time period, or after the time period. I would stay away from after the time period and stick with before and during. So what happened before the Columbian Exchange that you could use to set the stage for your essay? Exploration, specifically by which 2 European countries? Think Iberian Peninsula. Come on, y'all, who was sponsoring exploration during this time? Good, Spain and Portugal. Okay, so you could write about how Portugal went around Africa and why were they going around Africa in the first place? What was driving them to try to get to the Indian Ocean?
Spice trade?
The spice trade. Good. Again, an economic motive. So Portugal funds Vasco da Gama's exploration around the tip of Africa. You have Henry the Navigator starting his school for navigation, taking all of that technology from Asia, like the Latin sail and the magnetic compass, and building a new technology, the caravel, which used Latin sails in order to capture the winds and travel around the coast of Africa to the Indian Ocean. Okay, you could write about how they couldn't go through the Silk Road because the Silk Road was controlled by the Ottomans. You could write about how they couldn't go through the Mediterranean Sea because the Mediterranean Sea was controlled by the Italians. So they had to find a new route. So Portugal went around the tip of Africa. What did Spain do? How did they try to get to India?
Sailing west?
They went west, and who did they send?
Christopher Columbus.
Christopher Columbus in 1492. So that would be context that's happening during period 2. Okay, so Christopher Columbus sails west. He accidentally lands in the Caribbean, thinks he's made it to the Indies, and so he calls the Taino people that he meets Indians, right? And then we have the quote unquote discovery of the New World when they finally realize, hey, this actually isn't Asia, it's a whole different thing. And thus we see the Columbian exchange and the exploitation of that New World. Okay, all of that was background information. Now, did I give one sentence of background info? No, I did not. You could not fit all of that stuff that we just talked about in one sentence, because remember, you are writing a paragraph. And if your thesis is 1 to 2 sentences and a paragraph is around 5, then that means your context needs to be at least 3 sentences, probably closer to 5 sentences. Okay, so if you're talking about Portugal going around the tip of Africa to get to the spice trade using Vasco da Gama and the invention of the caravel from Prince Henry the Navigator School of Navigation, and you talk about Spain with Ferdinand and Isabella funding Christopher Columbus to sail west in order to get to the spice trade and finding the New World. You could talk about how Spain reconquered the Iberian Peninsula from the Al-Andalus, from the Islamic Caliphate in the Reconquista, okay, reasserting Catholicism throughout the Iberian Peninsula. That is more than just a phrase or a reference. That's the kind of level of detail that you need for context. But don't write 5 paragraphs on what happened before the Columbian exchange. Go ahead, get your context in 3 to 5 sentences, write your thesis with your causes and effects for categories, and then move into your body paragraphs where you actually answer your thesis. Okay, so 2 points are in the intro. The remaining points are a part of your body paragraphs. Now, in an LEQ, you had 2 SFI points and 2 analysis points, meaning your historical thinking skill and complexity, and then 1 grammar point. That changes with the DBQ. In the body paragraphs, you're going to have 2 document points, 1 HIP point, 1 outside SFI point, and 1 grammar point. Also complexity point. Almost forgot the complexity point. So some of these will be familiar, some of these will be brand new, but we're going to walk through each of these step by step. How many body paragraphs do you need? Well, 2. Okay, you could do 3, you could do 4 if time allows for it, but you need at least 2 body paragraphs. If you run out of time and you can't write the conclusion, that's fine, because the intro and the conclusion are both worth the same amount of points, the thesis and the context. Your thesis does, however, have to be in the intro or the conclusion. If your thesis is in your body paragraph, it can be the most beautiful thesis I've ever read. Doesn't matter, because it's not in the right place. You have to follow this rubric. Okay, so when you're writing your thesis, identify the historical thinking skill. In our example, we used causation. Identify the time frame, period 2, and then stick to that period, and create your categories. Social causes, economic causes, religious effects, et cetera, et cetera. So we know what your body paragraphs are going to be about. Okay, so this is in the intro, and this is in the intro. Make sure that you don't just repeat the question as well. If your question is analyze the impact of the Columbian exchange on the New World, don't just say there were many impacts on the New World. Well, yeah, what were they? You have to tell us specifically what were the effects. Don't just say effects happened. It's like if someone asked you, how are you today? And you said, I am. Okay, yeah, I get it, you exist, but give me some more detail. With context, you can talk about stuff that happened before, during, or after. I would recommend sticking to before and during. So Christopher Columbus, 1492, that's during. The Renaissance, that's before. All right, so remember the Renaissance was the rebirth of interest in Greco-Roman antiquity and knowledge. And so you start seeing all of the knowledge from the golden ages of the Gupta dynasty and from the Song and the Tang dynasty and the various centers of learning in the Islamic Empire, whether it's Timbuktu in Africa or the House of Wisdom in Baghdad. Europe starts catching up with the rest of the world coming out of their dark ages. That spurs the age of exploration because some of the technology from the Song and the Tang dynasty, like the, not the caravel, sorry, like the lateen sail, the magnetic compass, and, gunpowder are going to play critical roles in the age of exploration, okay? But it has to be more than a phrase or a reference. You can't just say, yeah, in 1492, Christopher Columbus sailed the ocean blue. Anyway, here's my thesis. That's not how it works. Multiple sentences, 2 points. Are we good so far?
For the historical thinking skill, how do you do you just want us to say the historical thinking skill is, or do you want us to phrase it in a different way?
On the AP exam, in your essay, you just have to make sure that your thesis addresses both of those parts. So don't write a sentence that says the historical significance, or sorry, the historical thinking skill the prompt is asking is cause and effect, okay? Because one, you're not supposed to use present tense, right? Now, y'all remember on the LEQ, I had a section on the Google Doc for you to identify causation, continuity and change, comparison, blah, blah, blah. I'm going to do that again for the DBQ. So you're going to tell me which historical thinking skill the prompt is asking you for a point on your major grade, but they don't require you to do that on the DBQ. You just have to write your essay answering the historical thinking skill. So in your thesis, if your historical thinking skill is causation, you could say one of the major causes of the age of exploration was the desire for wealth by the European countries like Spain and Portugal. This led to or resulted in negative demographic and social effects for the Native Americans as the Europeans began dominating the New World. Okay, I see action verbs in there that say, oh, cause, and oh, resulted in or led to. That tells me as the reader, they got it. They know what historical thinking skill they're being asked to cover. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you.
No worries. Now, if you are given like a cause and effect essay and you start doing comparison, it could be the best comparison that's ever been done, but you're not going to get the points because the thesis has to answer the prompt. You can't just pick and choose what you want to answer. You have to answer the specific question given to you. All right, so now that we've done the intro, which is exactly the same as the LEQ, just thesis and context, now we're moving on to the body paragraph. So part C is evidence, part D is analysis. We're going to look at analysis later because part D for analysis includes the complexity point, which, as you know, is the unicorn point. It's the most difficult point to get, but it also includes HIP points. And we're going to talk about what that acronym means. It's kind of like ACE, where we have special meanings for it. But first, let's look at evidence. Y'all know that you're given 7 documents. Well, how do you get points using those documents? Well, you have to describe the content. Note how this says content with an N, not context with an X. Context is background information. And you are going to discuss the context of some of these documents for analysis later in the HIP points, because that's what H stands for in HIP, is historical context. But you also get points for simply describing what is the document about. Okay, so the content is just a summary statement. Okay, and you get 1 point if you summarize or describe the content of 3 out of the 7 documents. Okay, so what that means is, let's say that your document is a letter from Christopher Columbus back to his sponsors, to the King and Queen of Spain, Ferdinand and Isabella. Well, in this letter, he writes on and on about, oh, your illustrious regal king and queen. It is an honor to work for you. And in your name, I have claimed this island in the Indies, which are full of people who are easily subjugated and I believe can bring you great wealth. Okay, so he's just going on and on about how great the Europeans are and how great the king and queen of Spain are. All right, so if you're going to describe the content of that, you're going to say, in document A, Christopher Columbus is describing his exploration in the Caribbean to the people who hired him. You now notice in that description, I'm not quoting, I'm not pulling sentences out of the document and just throwing it into my essay. You do not get points for quoting, y'all. In fact, the AP readers, when they see a quotation, they don't read it. They skip the quote, because you being able to copy something from a document and put it on a piece of paper is not the same as understanding what the document is saying. So in your own words, paraphrase what the document is about. Okay, if you have a let's see, if you have a picture of a again, let's say you have a picture of the Virgin Mary depicted as looking Native American. Okay, that would be your description of the document. Here we have the religious figure of the Virgin Mary in Christianity, but she is depicted as Native American instead of as European, like what the Europeans did in the Renaissance. It's simply a description of what the document is. Okay, if you do that for 3 out of the 7 documents, you get 1 point. If you do that for 6 of the documents and you use those documents to back up your thesis, then you can get 2 points. Again, what does this mean by using the document to back up your thesis? Well, remember that in our example, y'all had a thesis that said there were economic causes, demographic effects, and social effects. Okay, so let's say that you have 6 documents, 1 through 6, and document 1 talks about the spice trade. So you're going to use document 1 to back up your claim that there are economic causes for exploration because they're trying to get to the spice trade. Document 2 talks about smallpox. Document 3 talks about the encomienda. Document 4 talks about the asiento. Okay, document 5 talks about the silver mines. Document 6 talks about mercantilism. Okay, so if you use those documents as evidence to say, hey, do you remember when I said that the economic causes were a big part of exploration? Documents 1, 5, and 6 back me up. Okay, you know how I said that there were negative demographic effects? Well, documents 2 and 4 back me up. You know how I talked about how there were social effects? Document 3 is proof of that. So in addition to summarizing, document 2 is about this, document 3 is about this, you use it to back up your thesis. So this point is harder to get than this point, not just because it's double the amount of documents, but it's also using the documents, not just dropping them into your essay, but actually using them strategically. Now, how many points do you get if you use 4 out of the 7? You still get 1. How many points do you get if you use 5 out of the 7? You still get 1. You have to meet this threshold of 6 to qualify for this second point. How many points do you get if you use all 7? Still just 2. There's no bonus points, okay? So at least 3, at least 6 to get those 2 points. And where you're going to be using the documents? In your body paragraphs as evidence to back up your thesis. Are we good so far? But the documents aren't the only evidence that you use to back up your claim. You also have evidence from your brain. There's going to be information in the documents that you can use to back up your claim, but you also have outside SFI. And again, this can't be random trivia about that time period. Like, oh, during this time period, Russia rose to power. Well, that has nothing to do with the prompt. That has nothing to do with exploration, right? It has to be relevant, and it has to be more than a phrase or a reference, okay? And it also can't be the same outside info that you used in your context. So if your context, you're talking about the Renaissance and the Reconquista and Christopher Columbus, well, you can't use that again in your body paragraphs for this additional point. They have to be separate, just like in the LEQ. The context evidence is different from the body paragraph evidence. So in the documents that we discussed, they talked about, the asiento, the encomienda, smallpox. Well, let's say that you added in some outside evidence about, let me think, what haven't we talked about? Oh, the conversion of the META system into the encomienda. Okay, so nowhere in the documents was the META system mentioned. That means you can use it as outside SFI, but you have to tie it to your thesis. You can't just drop in, oh, the Inca did the META system and then say bye, right? You have to explain, how does that relate to the age of exploration? Well, that's how the Spanish developed the encomienda. They took the META system and changed it to suit their own needs. Does that make sense so far? Okay, that's all for your evidence points. Then you're going to get into your analysis points. Okay, so just as a recap for the body paragraphs, for the first point, you need to use at least 3 documents for their content, meaning summary, the main idea of the document. If you do that for 6 documents, you can get 2 points. If you do outside SFI, you can get 3 points. Okay, so 3 docs versus 6 docs, and then outside SFI. That is 3 points total. Add that to the 2 points from your intro, and you're already looking at a 5 out of 8. Okay, you're not even including the grammar point and the complexity point and the hip point. So you can still make a very good score, even if you don't hip or you don't get complexity. Okay, but it's important that y'all note, you should not use quotes. Copying from the document doesn't mean you understand what the document is saying. Okay, describe, this document refers to Christopher Columbus exploring the Caribbean, thinking that it was Asia. Okay, something along those lines. One sentence just talking about the summary of the document. Then for 3 of those documents that you use, you're going to need to do HIP. HIP stands for historical context, intended audience, purpose, and point of view. Now, you don't need to do all of these for each document. It's not like, oh, document 1, I got to do H and I and P and P, or document 2, same thing. You can pick one of them. So let's say you use documents 1, 2, and 3 in your essay. For document 1, you do H. Yay, check mark. Document 2, you do I. Yay, check mark. Document 3, you do H again. Can you do that? Yes, you can. Okay, yay, you've done 3 separate documents for HIP. You could do H for all of them, or you could do HIP or HII. Okay, it doesn't matter as long as you do 3 documents total. Okay, now what does HIP mean in the context of these documents? Well, it's important that you note that they refer directly to the documents mentioned. So what is the background of the document that you're reading? If it is a letter from Christopher Columbus, then the context for that is he was exploring on behalf of Spain to find Asia. The intended audience of the document, well, who is he writing to? The king and queen of Spain. Y'all, this happens. I don't want you to do it, but someone will. Every year, somebody will say that the intended audience of a document is like AP students doing the test. They're like, the intended audience for document A are the students who are taking the DBQ essay in 2021. Like, no, Christopher Columbus did not write that letter with you in mind. He wasn't thinking, oh, someday someone's going to have a test and I'm going to be on it. He is writing to his bosses, okay, the king and the queen of Spain. That's the intended audience of the document. You are never going to be the intended audience, okay? What is the purpose of the document? What is he trying to do with that letter to the king and the queen? Well, probably convince them to keep paying him. He's trying to convince them that he's doing his job and that they should keep sending him west. What is the point of view of the author? Well, do you know who Christopher Columbus is? Yeah, you know some facts about him that could play a role in his point of view and his perspective and potential bias. Okay, now if you don't know the author, let's say that you're reading an excerpt and it says this was done by Joe Smith, and you're like, I don't know who Joe Smith is, then you can't do point of view. You have to know the author in order to write about the point of view of the author. But we know about Christopher Columbus, so let's go ahead and do CORNPEG. CORNPEG is yet another acronym. We just have like alphabet soup in world history that goes through a list of potential topics that you could discuss when writing about point of view. C stands for class. What is their social class? Well, Christopher Columbus was educated. He could read maps and he could do math. Not well, mind you, because he got his calculations wrong, but he could still read and write. And that is a sign of social class. Could poor people read and write? No, because education wasn't free, okay? So you could say that he was probably middle class or higher due to his education, due to his skill set. Okay, but is that really like that important? Maybe not in the context of this. So let's keep going. Oh, what is his occupation? Occupation just means job. Well, guys, he was an explorer. He wasn't a tax preparer. He wasn't a baker. Okay, he was an explorer, exploring on behalf of Spain. Okay, that could be important for the point of view of the document, because as he's exploring, he comes across these peoples, the Taino people in the Caribbean, who he sees as inferior, and he believes that he can conquer them and take them over for the king and queen of Spain. So let's put an O by a star by O, because that could be relevant. R stands for race or religion. Okay, what race was he? He was Caucasian. He was from Europe. Does that play a role in how he writes about the Native Americans? Yeah, because he's going to see himself as a European as superior to the natives, thus leading to the brutality of the encomienda and forced conversions. So let's put a star by that. Well, what about religion? What religion do you think Christopher Columbus was if he's coming from Spain after 1492? He is Christian. Specifically, what type of Christian? Catholic. And how Catholic is Spain after the Reconquista? Yeah, super Catholic, violently Catholic, right? Everyone who's not Catholic is committing a crime, literally heresy. What's the punishment for heresy? Death. So religion could play a really big role in his perspective of how he views the Native Americans. He's going to view them as barbaric, and as committing heresy and crimes against their God. And so that's going to be used as a justification for conquest, right? So you can even use that if your essay you're writing about religious causes of exploration. You could write about how Spain really wanted to spread Catholicism. And so they're going to force conversions in the New World. N stands for nationality. So what country was Christopher Columbus from? Well, technically he was from the Italian city-states, but he worked for Spain, so not too important. P stands for political affiliation, but at this point you don't really have a lot of political affiliations. It's not like, oh, Democrats, Republicans, Green Party, right? You just have kings and queens in charge, and they're not elected. So P probably not as important in this particular example. E, ethnicity. Well, he's from Europe. Does that play a role in his treatment of the Native Americans? Yeah. And y'all, ethnicity is different from race, right? If we look at Western Africans versus Africans who have been forcibly imported into Brazil, even though people of African descent in Brazil and people in Africa are both African, they're both the same race, they may speak different languages or have different religions. For instance, Africans in Western Africa are going to speak Bantu or Arabic and be Islamic. In Brazil, they're going to speak Portuguese or Creole, and they're going to be Catholic. Okay, so even though they're the same race, that doesn't mean that culturally they have the same understanding. So ethnicity is separate from that. But his ethnicity, Columbus's ethnicity, probably not as big of a point as occupation and race or religion. Gender, well, he was male. Most of the documents that you read during period 2 are going to come from men because, again, we're talking about a patriarchal society. Okay, so if I were going to write about point of view of the author for document 1, I wouldn't focus on class. I wouldn't focus on nationality or political affiliation or ethnicity or gender. I would focus on his occupation as an explorer and conquistador and his race and religion and how that plays into how he describes the indigenous people as easily subjugated for forced labor and the justification of his treatment of the Native Americans under that point of view. Does that make sense? But again, for these documents, you don't need to do H and I and P and P. You just pick one and then move on. And you use it to back up your thesis. So if my thesis was, oh, religious causes, then yeah, this would be a good document for that. Are we supposed to write HIP in the essay? Yes. And y'all, I know this is a lot at once, but I have examples. So like in a body paragraph, you may start out with topic sentence, which is like, okay, what's your category? Economic effects. Okay. Then you might say in document 1, and then do a content statement. This graph shows the amount of silver that came into Spain before 1492 versus after 1492. And there is a steep increase after 1492. That's just a description of the document. Then you use the document. The historical context of document 1 indicates the wealth in the form of bullion that was imported to Spain from the gold and silver mines of the former Aztec and Inca empires. Okay, so topic sentence, economic effects or economic causes, you could do either. Document 1, content statement, just a summary. Document 1H for HIP, describing how it relates to your topic sentence. Easy peasy, move on. Are we good? Okay, then that's where we're going to leave off for today. When we get back, we're going to look at these 2 forms that are in your DBQ folder where it says Analyzing HIP Part 1 and Analyzing HIP Part 2. So we're going to go over specific information for H, I, P, and P, including that corn peg that we covered. And then in this document, it gives you sentence starters. So how do you write HIP in an essay? Well, if you write, considering that the author was a Catholic from Spain, they would likely feel superior to the Native Americans who were practicing a polytheistic religion with human sacrifice. Okay, that's HIP right there. You've done point of view. Okay, or for purpose, the author's intention. Christopher Columbus's intention in writing to the King and Queen of Spain was to convince them to continue funding his expeditions. Okay, these are all good starter sentences for how do you incorporate HIP into your body paragraphs. And so when we get back, we're going to go into a lot more detail about that before moving into more parts of the rubric for how you get the points for Part D for analysis and actual examples from the College Board of how to write a DBQ from a student who took the test.